Welcome to the ATA Podcast. I'm your host, Matt Baird, and you're listening to Inside Specialization, our new series on the what, why, and how of specializing in a specific field of translation or interpreting. In each episode, members of ATA's Professional Development Committee will interview translation and interpreting specialists. They'll ask about what the work entails, what skills are needed, the pros and cons, and so much more. The goal is to showcase the variety of career paths in translation and interpreting and help working professionals and students understand what's out there, how they can get started, and what they need to succeed. Specialization is arguably the best way to strengthen your translation and interpreting business and stand out from the crowd. We're hoping to bring you one episode a month, and we hope you'll join us on this informative journey. This podcast is brought to you by the American Translators Association. If you'd like to know more about ATA, we'll have some information at the end of the show. All right, now over to the PD Committee and this edition of Inside Specialization.
Hello, and welcome to the latest edition of the ATA Podcast Specialization Series, a special collaboration between the ATA Podcast and ATA's Professional Development Committee. My name is Ann Connor, and I'm a member of ATA's Professional Development Committee. We're really excited to bring you this episode with a spotlight on educational interpreting and translation. I am joined today by our special guests, Katharine and Natalia Abarca of the newly formed American Association of Interpreters and Translators in Education. Katharine Allen is a community and conference-trained interpreter with 3 decades of experience interpreting, training, and designing curricula. She is a licensed trainer and co-author for the Indigenous Interpreter and the Community Interpreter International Training Programs. As co-founder and co-president of Interpret America, she worked for 10 years to raise the profile of interpreting. Katharine is a founding member of the new American Association of Interpreters and Translators in Education. Katharine has an MA in Translation and Interpretation from the Middlebury Institute of International Studies. Contact her at www.wordsacrossborders.com. As a passionate bilingual professional, Natalia Abarca facilitates, leads, and manages the Orange County Department of Education, OCDE, Multilingual Consortium, a professional network established to support high-quality translation and interpreting services in schools. She facilitates the implementation of networks and leadership development and helps build capacity among multicultural staff. She is the main contact for the annual OCDE Interpreters and Translators Conference in Education. Natalia is also a founding member of the American Association for Interpreters and Translators in Education, AAITE, serving as the co-chair of the Best Practices Committee. She is also part of the blog team for the American Translators Association's Interpreters Division. Welcome, Katharine and Natalia.
Hi, it's great to be here. This is Katharine.
Yes, thank you so much for the invitation. This is Natalia.
You're welcome, ladies. Okay, I'll start with my first question. Why did you start the American Association of Interpreters and Translators in Education?
I'm going to take a first stab at it. This is Katharine. We actually started 2 years ago as a group of people who have been working in and around the educational interpreting and translating space as the Interpreting and Translation in Education work group. And just over the course of the last 2 years, we've been working to see whether the time is ripe to have a national association, to start to help professionalize and validate the ongoing work of thousands and thousands of our colleagues in schools who are hired as bilingual staff and hired directly as interpreters and translators. And so this is an area that has been developing, and it's very similar, I think, to what happened with medical interpreting earlier on, where you just kind of hit this tipping point where enough people have gained enough expertise and are fed up with not having a real formal national infrastructure for the work we're doing. So it just seems like it's the right time, and we are working towards creating national standards, ethics, and best practices in this setting.
Wow, that's great. What skills do interpreters and translators in educational settings need to have?
Well, I'm going to start this, and Natalia's going to finish it, because I'm going to talk about the skills that interpreters need, and she's going to share what translators need. So to me, one of the things that's most compelling about this setting is that interpreters need the entire skill set from interpreting, from what you would consider conference interpreters specialize in to what legal interpreters specialize in to what medical interpreters specialize in, because educational interpreters are working in settings where they're doing special ed interpreting. There's a ton of it's community, there's lots of dialogue, but there's lots of legal content. There's a lot of legal interactions and disciplinary hearings, right? I mean, just a huge setting. And then the part that many people don't realize, but which is a huge part of many interpreters' job, are public facing board meetings, press conferences, presentations, back to school nights, school educational presentations, where interpreters are doing, really conference style simultaneous interpreting with multiple presenters on any topic under the sun. So you actually can't get away with a partial skill set in this setting at all. You really have to have a fully developed skill set and a good awareness of which ethics govern which kinds of settings and meetings inside school settings. So that's what I'd say about educational interpreters. Is that you kind of need to be a jack of all trades. So Natalia,
yes,
how
well,
about
thank
for
you,
translators?
Katharine. For translators, I think one of the biggest skills that a translator needs to do is be aware of project management, also be knowledgeable about the programs and the contents that they're going to be translating for. So, for example, if we are staff translators, we have first-hand communication with the developers of the curriculums or the documents, and we want to assure that we are conveying the message properly. So we need to understand how many words we can translate per day, how many pages we can translate per day. We need to go to a revision process. And also we need to understand the difference between dubbing, closed captioning, transcript. Lately with the pandemic, a lot of our programs have been translated in multiple languages to give access to all our families. So we needed to learn how to manage all the requests that came through our office regarding translations. And I manage more languages, but I'm only fluent in Spanish and English. So it is interesting the way that you need to translate multiple documents, and we need to get into an agreement that certain words need to be kept in English for consistency. So for example, some program names, some grant names. So it is very interesting, but that's the first advice that I could give to the audience is if you want to work in translation for schools, we need to be aware of the topics and also be very resourceful.
And could I just add one other thing, Anne, to that?
Sure.
Because I think one of the biggest challenges that interpreters or linguists or bilingual personnel or even freelancers coming in is that there tends to be this conflation of translation and interpreting as a single skill set in schools. So a lot of different school districts will hire both, and it's just so you're the school translator, and what they really mean is you're the translator and the interpreter. So there's just a lot of work that needs to be done to raise awareness that these are two separate skill sets and that not every bilingual person is going to be able to do both well. And that's one of the reasons why we're really excited about the new organization, because those are some of the things we'll be working on.
Wow, that sounds really daunting to me. Can translators and interpreters possessing those skills become certified for school settings at this point?
Natalia, you want to jump in? I mean, the simple answer is no.
It's no.
But that's what you're working on, right?
Yeah,
exactly.
That is the ultimate. Exactly. Yes, that is the ultimate goal, to go through all of the foundation building that's needed to be able to ultimately end up with a certification that targets that setting. But so it's certainly helpful if you have certifications in other parts of the field, but there's no certification that targets this setting at all. Yeah.
Okay. Are most educational interpreters on staff in school districts, or are they independent contractors?
Well, this is Natalia, and I would love to answer this question. First of all, we need to understand how schools are set up, right? So I work for a county office of education, and we have 27 school districts, and each school district have certain schools. So some schools may have an interpreting unit, or maybe some districts have an interpreting unit, or sometimes they just have freelancers coming from, different language services companies. Also, some of our staff are bilingual, by dual role employees. So for example, you are a community liaison or a family parent advocate, but at the same time, you need to do the role as an interpreter and as a translator. So every school district has a different system, but normally we have a little bit of both. We have full-time staff and we have independent contractor or a dual employees, like we call them, right? So we need to understand a little bit about how every community is formed. And also some school districts have very, very well formed units with 4 or 5 languages. They have full staff interpreters, but others rely on outside organizations.
Right, and I guess that's language specific as well. So depending on what need you have for certain languages.
Exactly. So for example, we have in Orange County, we have 36 dual immersion schools, right? So we have Mandarin, Korean, we have Spanish, and we have Vietnamese. So depending on the community is the need of that type of interpreter. But we have several languages that are spoken. I know some areas have indigenous languages. So it's a little bit all over the place. That's one of the reasons why this association is working on developing a job task analysis, where it's going to give a school district the opportunity to see who employee you need to hire, because we are all over the place. Like my position is a program specialist for language services, but I need to do interpretation and translation. So we have other employees that they are dual role employees, and they also have to do interpretation and translation. So sometimes it is hard for our parents and our students to understand that when we're interpreting, we need to follow the interpreting, code of ethics and our own rules. But then when we are a community liaison, then we can assess them and tell them, programs or things that are going to benefit them and their students. So that is the reason why we strongly believe that this organization is going to help school districts and leaders to manage better their staff.
Right.
Right. Maybe you can have real hats, and put one hat on and say I'm an interpreter, and the other one I'm liaison.
And it is an interesting thing, just to piggyback, that this is a setting that is different. So typically all of the studies show that, in the translation and interpreting world, 75% are freelance. Like that has just been, confirmed in many over and over again. But we don't know if that's true for school interpreting and translation, because so many people are hired on directly and work as employees. So at some point, we've got to do that research and sort of figure out what percentage are working as employed people with those dual roles, or are coming in as freelance, because I think it's actually going to be a little bit of a different landscape than in our other specializations.
Great. I was going to ask you what a typical day would look like, but I think you pretty much covered that. It's all over the place, all over the map. But I am really interested in this. During COVID-19, what really happened to the school districts then?
Oh, well, this is super good. So maybe, Katharine, you can answer what happened to you as an interpreter, and maybe I can answer what happens at the county level.
Well, I think you should start, Natalia, because the schools, you lived it in the way that I did not. Yeah, and I'll piggyback on.
Okay, perfect. So I'm going to tell you what happened after March 17 when COVID hit and schools were closed. And I'm going to remember this day forever. So we were told pack and go, and you have 2 hours to leave. So our first thing that we did is we canceled all our in-person assignments. We tried to transfer all the files we had onto a Google Drive, and then we were gone. So the first thing that we did is I rely a lot on our partners and our networks, and that's something that I highly advocate for people, that we need to find those key partners that can help us. A lot of companies did translations for me for free, because everything was happening so fast, and we needed to translate letters about school closures, letters about how your student is going to receive online classes. We send letters about, health situations. So everything was happening so rapidly, because after the governor was sending new regulations and new directives, everything was changing in schools. So we did not have time to develop contracts with organizations like, for example, Italian interpretation or Italian translation. So we receive a lot of good support from our outside partners, and also among my network. A lot of us were doing board meetings and we did not know how to work with Zoom. We did not know how to work with Facebook Live. So we came up together as a group and we start sharing best practices, the good, the bad, and the ugly, and learning from each other. So it was like we felt at the beginning like first responders. We were just like on the go 24/7, trying to meet our students' needs. Also, the new world for us was virtual world, right? I feel like technology is my third language right now, because all of us all of a sudden needed to become technical savvy, and we needed to start assessing our teachers and our administrators on how to use the Zoom interpretation link when we were not even aware of how to use it. We needed to start assessing if the link, if the interpreting feature in Zoom works in Chromebooks. How can you join from an iPhone? How can you join from an Android phone? And what happens if the parent does not have this technology access, right? So we start troubleshooting and we start learning how to provide best services to everybody. So it was a very, very rewarding experience to see how the interpreting and the bilingual staff community came and we all jump in and help each other. But at the same time, we were teaching our managers and our teachers and our psychologists on how the system worked. And then trying to advocate for having virtual partners, it was another big task because we could not be interpreting for an hour or 2 hours just on a solo. Because what happens if the Wi-Fi was gone? What happens if my battery ran off from my laptop, right? So we need to have that backup person. And we start developing a lot of dry run meetings with the programs and the managers. And then at the same time to provide services. So we were doing conferences at the same time, and we were doing simultaneous interpretation at the same time. So trying to assess our programs and best practices on how to work with interpreters virtually and how to provide the best service to our parents was one of the most biggest experience and things that we did during COVID. I really believe that after COVID, I think things are looking a little bit normal, but we're still going to continue with remote practices because they were very successful for some of us. Katharine, feel free to jump in if something happened to you.
Oh, well, yeah.
Personally.
I mean, unless if it's okay, Anne, if I just keep going a little bit with that topic.
Of course.
Yeah, of course. So first of all, I think that what Natalia is describing, to me, it just was replicated across the entire country. And I think we have just thousands and thousands of unsung hero interpreters and translators who, did everything they possibly could to keep educational access available for, families and students who had either low technology resources and didn't have the language access. I mean, it was a little different than in, healthcare settings where there's, a couple decades now of sort of an infrastructure for telephonic and video remote interpreting, as well as telehealth. Those systems were there, and so they could be built upon. Whereas in the educational settings, there really was no remote interpreting. That wasn't a thing at all. So everybody started from scratch. And what I would add to that is just, there's a couple of things. One is just how much it has force the interpreter to shift their roles some. You often end up as being the one who understands the technology in the meeting. And so you have to step in and kind of be front and center and much more interventionist than we're trained to be. And that's then a difficult shift, to like how we even have people are even developing scripts and how do you, all of the kind of infrastructure you need to help people access the technology. And then the other thing that my biggest concern, I think, around what I'm seeing is the additional stress around the simultaneous work and the really lack of understanding across the whole setting that simultaneous should be done in a part with teams, right? And so it is not uncommon for interpreters to be working hours solo, doing simultaneous remotely. And we all know that that shouldn't be happening even on site. You want to have a partner if you're going, over a period of time. And so you need to be trading off every half hour, and remote interpreting is more tiring. And you really need that partner. So I'm sort of a little worried. One of the big areas of advocacy, I think, that our new organization can focus on is really educate on proper working conditions and what you need, what really is required to support a simultaneous interpretation, whether it's remote and now back on site. But for me in general, for COVID, I just the hit that to language access was just horrific all the way across the country. And all the educational interpreters and translators who help facilitate that, I just think they're amazing. I would say.
Oh, I do too. And my head's spinning just listening to you ladies about, and I didn't even do it. That's not my area of translation. But I was just wondering about the self-care, like, because it's got to be, the burnout has got to be amazing on both parts, the translators and in the interpreters. So how did you have to help with all that or advise your staff how to do that?
Yeah, so I can start a little bit with that question. For self-care, we implemented self-care lessons during our meetings with our staff, and we opened the sessions up to everybody nationwide. If you wanted to come to attend one of the sessions, please, everybody was welcome. And the reason why we started doing this is because everybody was very, very stressed with what happened with COVID, right? We all had personal situations, people lost their jobs, we had kids at homes, we had our pets, and we had to be providing interpretation for several hours. So part of the best practices that we are recommending to a lot of our teams is doing self-care, right? Take a moment out, try to find a mentor, a coach, a colleague that you can vent, somebody that you can find support, and how did they work with best practices, sharing documents. And this is something that we are trying to embed in all our trainings. And also I embedded self-care while I was scheduling our interpreters, being mindful of not scheduling them for longer periods of time. And when they were asking us to do conference interpreting, also being mindful to have backup staff for them to be able to switch every 30 minutes.
That does sound ideal.
In terms of self-care, right. And so, I think one of the things that I certainly, I work as I'm a freelancer in everything I do, but I have attended those meetings and learned a lot. I learned a lot about how to manage, technology and educational settings just by attending them. So it was one of the things that was really gratifying, I think, in our entire profession was how much people have shared out professionally and for free, and how generous people have been during this time. But for me, self-care for the video interpreter is just absolutely critical. And I think we have a tendency to be that sort of, sacrificial. I can do it. I can hang on. I can do it. But the toll that the remote interpreting takes is really real. The fatigue. I have finished sessions, when I go home and I have a headache for 24 hours afterwards. And, if you overdo it and you don't have enough breaks and you don't have enough support, it has real physical costs in addition to all the emotional costs, right? So I think those self-care messages are even more important for remote interpreting in some ways, where we've got to find ways to be networking and to really be able to set those limits as much as possible. It's much harder when you are employed, right? It's a lot harder to say no to a boss who doesn't have this understanding. And so I know people push themselves. So this is some of the areas. This is why it is so important that, we begin to professionalize this area and start to provide all these resources that, we've been building out over the last couple of decades in other areas of interpreting, because it's stressful. It's a lot of hard work and it's real, and we need to validate it and get people, as much support as we can.
Wow, it's so interesting. I know if you wanted to talk about the new association that you're forming, and also any advice that you would give a professional interpreter or translator who's interested in specializing in the educational arena. Any of those things.
Yeah, so I would love to share about an advice, and maybe Katharine, you can close with our initiative. So a piece of advice that I would love to give to interpreters that are looking forward to working in schools is understanding that interpreting at schools goes beyond special education. We have to be knowledgeable about all the programs that are happening in our schools, like what is multi-tier systems of support, what is common core state standards, how the legislation works for education, what is foster youth, what is the LCAP. So all of these different programs is going to give us a better perspective on which areas we're going to be supporting. Like Katharine mentioned earlier, the skills of an educational interpreter are everything, right? You need to know a little bit about medical, a little bit about legal, a little bit about conference interpreting, be part of your school community, learn about what is a PTA meeting, what is the school site council, what does it stand for, learn a lot of the acronyms. That's kind of the piece of advice I can give, because it goes beyond special education. A lot of our work is focused in general education, and it goes across school districts. So the more resourceful we are and the more we learn about the programs, the better we can support our students. Also, if you come from a foreign country, the way I grew up in the educational system that I experienced when I was younger is totally different actually during these days. So be mindful and learn about the grading system, about elementary school, middle school, high school, about the adult transition programs, about the hearing program. So the more we learn about different programs that are happening in our schools, in our districts, the easier it's going to be for us to provide that language support.
Okay, so now is your head spinning? Are you dizzy yet, Anne?
Yes, I am. Dizzier than I was before.
Right. That's right. So, I mean, so it is just like any other area of specialization. You need to have an understanding of the laws that, structure education and all the rest of it. So but the good news is that we are beginning to see more training opportunities. We have, a couple programs are popping up in different community colleges, and, more and more you're seeing the short course training and the sessions and the conferences. So I think we're on the track, right? It's not a complete vacuum that way. And one of the upsides of the remote, everyone learning how to engage remotely, is that I think you'll continue to see remote trainings offered, because so many people can access them. So thank you, Natalia, but you did make me laugh. It's like I've never seen so many acronyms as there are in school settings. Like, it is just acronym city. It's sort of a nightmare. In terms of just, thank you for giving the opportunity for us to close and talk about the association. So it is a huge honor and sort of a humbling task to be part of a group of people that have just worked so hard over the last 2 years to really define the scope of what of an association, and do the hard, boring, difficult, technical work of creating bylaws and figuring out the structure and the mission and the the vision and the whole bit. But in that time, we've also had committees doing really important committee work for the last 2 years. And to me, I would really want to highlight, well, first I'd like to highlight Natalia's committee, the Best Practices Committee, with her co-chair, Danielle Tamayo, because one of the first things they did early on in the pandemic was put out a best practices document for remote interpreting in educational settings. And that's something that's available, on the website, and they're continuing to work on, but it was, shared out immediately as fast as we could, because we saw that need. But we have 2 other committees that are, really working to create that foundational code of ethics, right? I mean, you really can't have a profession without a code of ethics. And so we have the Job Task Analysis Committee, which is doing this national surveying work, just trying to identify, what do educational interpreters and translators do? What are they actually doing? Because that is, a core step in understanding both your code of ethics and also ultimately how you would have a test for that. And we have an ethics and standards of practice committee that's also doing a thorough review of all existing standards and working with the Job Task Analysis Committee to start to figure out, okay, how is this code of ethics going to need to be different to really support and cover this arena? So even though we've been doing organizational building, we've got these amazing committees working. And so I just want to give a shout out to all my colleagues at the new American Association of Interpreters and Translators in Education, because I think we've done it right, and we're off to a really solid foot, and we're just thankful for all the support and sort of attention we've been getting, and we know we're on the right track because there's so much interest in it. So I guess that's what I would say, to cap, that piece.
Yes, I will also like to just share, I commend Katharine for her amazing work and leadership. It has been a privilege for me to experience firsthand working in this past couple of years with our group, right? How much we have grown, how much we have learned from each other. And I'm confident that this is the right way to go. And I am a firm advocate for language access and for interpreters and translators and professionalization in the field.
Well, I thank you both, because on behalf of the American Translators Association members and also Professional Development Committee member, I think we're all going to be the greater for this effort that you're starting, and just to get everything formalized and tested and things like that. I think it's just wonderful. It's a really unmet need in the United States right now. And thank you so much again for joining me. And I wish you both the best with this effort, and all of your staff and your committee members. And please do keep us informed. The ATA, I'm sure you're both members, and you'll get the word out, and then we'll post it all over the place when it happens.
Thank you so much. Thank you
so much for having us.
All right,
thank
you
so
ladies.
much for having us. All right.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Bye.
You've been listening to Inside Specialization, our new series on the what, why, and how of specializing in a specific field of translation or interpreting. Big thanks to everyone involved in the production of this episode. ATA's PD committee developed and coordinated the interview. Mixing and editing was done by Derek Platts. Mary David and Rashawn Paccarel at ATA headquarters provided editorial and technical support. Now, if you learned anything new in today's podcast, I bet there's somebody out there who would like to know it too. Don't be stingy. Tell them about us. I've gotten to know so many great podcasts that way. I promise they'll thank you for it. And if you're not an ATA member, listen up. I've been a member for over 20 years. I can honestly say that ATA launched my freelance career, and I've never looked back. Nowadays, the demand for translators and interpreters is at an all-time high, but finding quality work isn't easy. ATA membership can make a difference. And ATA isn't just for translators or interpreters. Individuals, companies, and organizations can become members. We have teachers, professors, hospital administrators, language company owners, technology developers, as well as language companies, universities, hospitals, and government agencies. Go to ATA's website, atanet.org, for details. Or check out past episodes of this podcast where we talk about the benefits of membership and what's currently happening in the association. Thanks again for listening, everyone. Talk to you again soon.